This is as good a time as any to discuss the nature of chaos. The great powers of chaos are locked in eternal struggle against one another. Why should that be the case? Why has one of the four not risen to dominance over the others? To understand that, we must understand what sets each power apart from the others. As a quick overview, Tzeentch is able to simultaneously trap servants in their emotional flaws to bind them, yet still have them able to grow and improve in some ways. Khorne is able to gain strength from violent conflict, including conflict against Khorne himself. Slaanesh is the chaos god most specifically dangerous to the other three chaos gods, due to its potential to subsume them thematically. And Nurgle is the best able to align the general trend of chaos to make things fall apart with his own thematic strength of decay and entropy. Thus, each of the four great powers of chaos has an unique advantage against the other three. They each believe that this will ultimately see them victorious over the others at the end of time, and they each must struggle and jockey against the others in the endless great game of chaos. The interplay between the chaos gods is a fascinating aspect of Warhammer 40,000 lore, and honestly some of the oldest part of the lore from Warhammer and from 40k, which still exists. Space Marines used to use laser guns, for God's sake, but the Chaos Gods are still around. And by looking at the unique advantages and dynamics of each, we can grasp their roles in the setting. Let's start with Tzeentch. The potential for growth in Tzeentch's servants, evinced by Magnus's post-heresy growth in subtlety and long-term planning while a demon Primarch, is part and parcel of his role as the god of change. Tzeentch's unique combination of entrapment and growth sets him apart in the great game. Tzeentch's power as the god of change lies in his ability to bind his servants to their own flaws while still allowing them to grow and improve in their craft in a way which the other three gods cannot. Their own daemon princes, their own daemon primarchs simply stagnate, as do daemon princes of Chaos Undivided, such as the daemon primarch Lorgar. This duality serves a few different purposes for Tzeentch. There's empowerment through dependency. Tzeentch allows his followers to improve because their growth deepens their reliance on Tzeentch. Magnus's growing mastery of sorcery binds him more tightly to Tzeentch even before he falls, because the very power he wields comes with strings attached. The more Magnus grows, the more entangled he becomes. Tzeentch's servants, such as the daemon Primarch Magnus or these not yet daemonic Ahriman, can adapt and refine their methods, using evolution as a weapon. This adaptability makes them more dangerous, I will say, than the static followers of other chaos gods, who tend to plateau once they have embraced their respective masters' domains. By embodying change itself, Tzeentch thus ensures that his power remains unbounded. While Khorne's power might plateau in the absence of conflict, Tzeentch thrives on the unpredictability of his schemes, always creating new opportunities for manipulation and power. Thus, Tzeentch's ability to entrap his servants while still allowing them to grow and change gives him a significant advantage in the great game of chaos. While the other gods thrive on specific extremes, Tzeentch's adaptability and foresight make him uniquely positioned to exploit the weaknesses of his rivals, weaknesses which they cannot shore up because they lack the ability to grow and improve. However, this same adaptability creates inherent instability, as Tzeentch's ever-shifting plans are as likely to unravel as they are to succeed. All right, Khorne. Khorne's advantage is his ability to draw strength from violence, even violence directed against himself or his followers. If you're a fan of the SCP setting, this is like Bugsy the Bear. Anyway, this creates a paradoxical resilience because he uses conflict as fuel. Khorne thrives in an environment of endless war and bloodshed, which ensures his strength as long as chaos itself endures. Even the internecine struggles of chaos fuel his power. And then, unlike Tzeentch, whose servants often scheme against one another, there is a simplistic unity of purpose among the followers of Khorne. His followers are united by their shared love of violence. This single-minded focus creates an inherent strength, as there is less room for ideological conflict. But it must be noted that Khornate cults do have a very high death rate as they kill each other just for love of the game. But then they have self-destruction as a weapon. Khorne's nature makes him uniquely dangerous to the other Chaos gods because their own struggles against him feed his strength. The more they fight him, the more powerful he becomes. The more his followers kill each other, the more powerful he becomes. All right, let's talk about Slaanesh. We might talk about him a little more later, but a little bit. Slaanesh's unique danger lies in the thematic flexibility of excess. He threatens to encroach on the domains of the other gods. Khorne's warriors may revel in violence to such a degree that their excessive violence inadvertently empowers Slaanesh through their indulgence. Even the slow, rotting process of Nurgle can easily spiral into an obsession with despair, creating a pathway for Slaanesh to creep into that domain. Tzeentch's endless scheming and pursuit of change can lead to excessive ambition, making his servants vulnerable to Slaanesh's seductive pull. Slaanesh is, perhaps, the most existentially threatening Chaos god to the other three, because he represents the potential to subsume their domains into his own. Khorne can absorb violence directed at him and use it to empower himself, yes, but Slaanesh can turn the excesses of the extreme other deities into portions of his own domain, aspects of himself. Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle thus risk being subsumed as merely greater daemons of Slaanesh. Now, Nurgle's a weird one, because Nurgle aligns himself with the fundamental nature of entropy and collapse, and this makes his strength uniquely inevitable in some ways. Decay is the natural conclusion of all things, whether it's a rotting corpse, a collapsing empire, or the disintegration of a carefully laid plan. Nurgle embodies this inevitability and gains power from it. Nurgle's appeal to followers lies in the false comfort he offers, while Khorne and Slaanesh demand endless struggle, endless ambition, and Tzeentch offers nothing but ceaseless change forever. Nurgle provides the illusion of acceptance and respite, a kind of false nirvana. And then, of course, there's the alignment with chaos itself. Since the warp thrives on things falling apart, Nurgle's thematic alignment with decay positions him as a natural beneficiary of chaos's nature. His power grows as the warp makes things fall apart, and his power grows as the galaxy in the real world succumbs to entropy. Thus we have the great game of chaos. Each chaos god's unique strength ensures that none of them can achieve absolute dominance over the others without first receiving staunch resistance from the others. The endless competition ensures that the chaos gods remain locked in their great game, each seeking to undermine the others and improve their own strength, willing to engage in alliances only to bring down a stronger opponent. Not only, but usually. This dynamic interplay is what keeps the forces of chaos both powerful and fractured, ensuring their eternal struggle for supremacy. Tzeentch has conflict with Khorne. Tzeentch thrives on manipulation and subtlety, which are anathema to Khorne's straightforward love of violence. Their domains are thus opposed, with Tzeentch plotting endlessly to outwit Khorne's brute force, is opposed to Nurgle. Slaanesh's pursuit of perfection and excess is at odds with Nurgle's embrace of imperfection and decay. While Slaanesh seeks to transcend limitations, Nurgle revels in the inevitable decline of all things. Tzeentch is opposed to Slaanesh. Tzeentch's endless ambition and desire for change clash with Slaanesh's seduction of living in the moment. While Tzeentch seeks to reshape reality, tempts him with the allure of indulgence, satisfaction, and reveling in what one has already accomplished. Khorne is opposed to Nurgle. Khorne's desire for destruction actively contrasts with Nurgle's cyclical decay. Khorne revels in immediate violence, but Nurgle is content to wait as entropy does its work. And then, of course, the biggest rivalries. Tzeentch versus Nurgle is straightforwardly creation versus destruction. Khorne versus Slaanesh. Okay, that's an interesting one. Khorne is all about the other. How much violence can you do for Khorne? How great is the foe you face? How many skulls can you pile at the throne of Khorne? You don't matter. Only violence matters. Slaanesh is all about the self. What I feel, what I do, what I want. My life is what matters to me. If you want more in-depth analysis of these two big rivalries, you should really read the background book, Liber Chaotica. It's great. You know what? Let's look at that book and see what we can get from it. I've only got a couple of copies, out, because whenever I move, I'd end up losing a bunch of stuff in boxes in the basement for years at a time. But eventually I'll get the others. Anyway, in the canonical background book, Liber Chaotica, in the first volume, there's a section titled The Last Days, which is an eschatological prophecy of what the followers of Khorne think will occur with the ultimate victory of their god. In The Last Days, Khorne sacrifices 7 of his 8 greatest servants in order to change the universe to be inimical to his enemies in preparation for the final battle. But when Khorne comes to the 8th servant, he finds that this servant has grown in power sufficient to rival Khorne himself. And so, Khorne and this rival fight each other until one of them is victorious. His servants cannot tell them apart, and the prophecy does not care about which of the two wins. In the 3rd volume of Liber Chaotica, there is a section titled, And This Is How the World Shall End, which is an eschatological prophecy of what the followers of Nurgle think will occur with the ultimate victory of their god. In And This Is How the World Shall End, it is explicitly stated that none shall survive the final days of the universe. Quote, all shall be forgotten with the passing of years. There will be no exceptions. Nothing is permanent. I understand this to mean that Nurgle, the god of decay, will himself plan to decay and die at the end of all things. Meanwhile, the 4th volume of Liber Chaotica is about Tzeentch, and in it there is a section titled The End is Almost Upon Us, which is a theological treatise on eschatology with respect to Tzeentch. Quote, there is a way through the coming night, but to find it we must change. We must change and change until change is our master, for no being, not God, not mortal, can catch and hold that which has no form. I take this to mean that the capital C, change, is Tzeentch, and that Tzeentch intends to somehow survive past the end of the universe. Book 2 does not contain any Slaaneshi eschatology. This background material thus allows us to see an interesting difference between the Chaos gods. Khorne, the god of killing, may die if he is victorious. Nurgle, the god of dying, will die if he is victorious. Tzeentch, the god of changing, intends to survive in some sense if it is victorious. By examining their ultimate goals and outcomes, we thus gain a deeper understanding of their nature and how their individual essence shapes their vision of the end times. We can see, for Khorne, the cycle of blood and rivalry. Khorne's prophecy envisions a world consumed by endless war, culminating in a final battle with his greatest servant. This reflects Khorne's nature as the god of violence, rivalry, and conquest. But the prophecy suggests that Khorne's essence may not persist beyond this confrontation, as his existence is somehow subordinate to the act of conflict itself. The idea that Khorne's greatest servant could rival or surpass him thus shows Khorne's fundamental drive for strength through combat. Khorne's very existence fosters the creation of warriors who could challenge him, implying that his ethos ultimately contains the seeds of his own self-destruction. His ultimate goal of domination through bloodshed contains a built-in contradiction. The very act of achieving his final victory may result in his annihilation. Without enemies, there is no more war, and thus no Khorne. Nurgle, of course, is the god of decay and oblivion. His prophecy aligns with his identity as the god of decay and entropy, emphasizing that all things, including himself, are impermanent. Nurgle's philosophy, such as it is, centers on the acceptance of decay as a natural and inevitable process, making his own self-destruction the logical endpoint of his existence. Nurgle's followers find solace in the false nirvana of the inevitability of death and decay, making his eschatological prophecy a kind of reassurance. Nothing lasts forever, but in that truth lies a form of peace. Even Nurgle's own decay is part of the natural order he represents. Unlike Tzeentch's quest for survival or Khorne's obsession with perpetual conflict, Nurgle thus accepts his end as inevitable. This passive resignation reflects his philosophy of embracing stagnation and entropy as universal truths. Tzeentch's prophecy reveals a stark contrast to the others. As the god of change, Tzeentch views survival as an ongoing process of transformation. His eschatology suggests that adaptability and metamorphosis will allow him to persist even beyond the destruction of the universe. For Tzeentch, the end of the universe is not a conclusion, it is a transition. His prophecy implies that by embracing perpetual change, he can slip through the cracks of finality and continue to exist in a new form, unbound by the constraints of the old universe. Tzeentch's vision also thus serves as a theological justification for his manipulations. Change is framed not as merely a means to an end, but also an end in itself, an eternal cycle of transformation that allows him to endure. There are a couple of ways that this is a philosophical irony. Tzeentch's attempt to preserve himself through change highlights his paradoxical nature by showing that he thrives on chaos and instability, yet seeks to maintain his own existence, a form of continuity, through the very forces he unleashes. And until the end of reality, Tzeentch also intends to maintain his own prominence. Slaanesh has a missing eschatology. The lack of an eschatological prophecy for Slaanesh in Liber Chaotica demands explanation. But then again, it is foolish to demand chaos to make sense. Is it that Slaanesh's hedonistic theology focuses more on the immediacy of indulgence rather than long-term goals? Is it that Slaanesh's relatively recent creation compared to the other chaos gods may mean that its narrative lacks the ancient mythic weight of the others? Does Slaanesh simply view the end of things as irrelevant, as its essence revolves around the pursuit of excess and gratification without regard for ultimate consequences? Maybe we'll get back to that. But comparing Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch, the core paradox is that each god's vision of ultimate victory reflects their core identity and reveals inherent contradictions. Khorne's strength fosters his own challenger and does nothing to guarantee his survival. Nurgle's stagnation ensures his own decay and death, and Tzeentch's endless change threatens the stability needed for his survival. These eschatologies demonstrate the fundamental instability of chaos itself. The powers of chaos are defined by the very forces that will undo them. Even in ultimate victory, chaos remains chaotic and self-defeating. For mortals, these visions underscore the futility of aligning with chaos. Even the gods themselves are not immune to the forces they represent, making their promises of power and immortality inherently hollow. Liber Chaotica Volume 1 contains not just Khornate eschatology, but also a creation myth for the chaos god Khorne, titled The Mountain. 8 mortal kingdoms fall into a frenzied cataclysm of senseless violence, both disorganized between people and organized between the kingdoms, until, quote, the bloodlust that had driven each mortal forward had at least been sated. The armies could fight no more. Every soldier lifted his voice and cried out for release, for victory, or for the strength to carry on. The true God had heard his servant's cry, and his answer was one of bloodlust, power, and awesome violence. The embryonic God screamed his name in a battle cry, drove the cowardly mad, even as it strengthened the worthy beyond mortal effort. I feel that this creation myth is quite straightforward. Excessive violence led to the god of violence. Now, the account does not specifically mention the war in heaven, but whatever, just moving past that. As simple as it is interesting to note how little change there is between Khorne's creation myth, The Mountain, and Khorne's eschatological prophecy, The Last Days. Khorne's theology is clear. In the simple purity of violence without reason or justification, there is a terrible and unchanging deep truth about reality and unreality. The profound simplicity and unyielding nature of his dominion underscores the unchanging and eternal essence of violence, bloodlust, and martial strength. Let's examine this further. Khorne's creation myth, The Mountain, reveals several essential truths about Khorne's nature and origins, his theology. Violence begets violence. The creation of Khorne is not attributed to a singular act or divine will or some such, but to collective violence and bloodlust of mortals. This positions Khorne as the inevitable consequence of unrestrained aggression and conflict. The army's inability to stop fighting, even as they cried out for release, mirrors the cyclical nature of Khorne's theology of violence. Bloodlust feeds bloodlust, and the need for release only drives one to greater apoplexies of violence. Khorne's emergence is described as strengthening the worthy and driving the cowardly mad. This duality thus reflects his disdain for weakness and his glorification of martial prowess, where survival and strength are the only measures of worth. In The Last Days, Khorne sacrifices 7 of his own 8 greatest champions to shape reality into a final battlefield, where violence is the only option, and thus the ultimate truth of his theology, violence, is fully realized. The act of sacrificing his champions emphasizes that even the strongest servants are tools in service of violence. Khorne himself being possibly killed in these last days shows that he is himself a tool in service of violence. His willingness to consume his own is a testament to his unrelenting nature and perpetual struggle. By having the prophecy end with his battle against his own greatest servant, the eternal cycle of creation through violence and apex of violence and self-destruction through violence is the ultimate truth of existence according to Khornate theology. Both The Mountain and The Last Days highlight the immutability of Khorne's domain. There is no subtlety and there is no evolution or change in his theology. The purity of violence is an unchanging constant. Khorne's unchanging nature, the stark simplicity of what he views as theological truth, is very straightforward. The primacy of bloodshed. His dominion is not adorned with pretense or philosophical nuance. Violence is not a means to an end. It is the end itself. In this, Khorne's theology has an almost paradoxical purity. It is untainted by ambition, ideology, or deception. He dismisses subtlety entirely. Khornate theology is that violence in its rawest form is the only true expression of life. Anything else is corruption or cowardice. The symmetry between Khorne's creation myth and his eschatology prophecy reinforces his cyclical nature. Just as Khorne is born from bloodshed, his prophecy envisions a universe consumed by violence, with himself potentially killed in an endless struggle against his greatest servant and greatest rival. The beginning and end are mirrors of each other. His mythology lacks the progression or transformation seen in the others. His essence is timeless, immutable, and deeply rooted in the fundamental nature of conflict. The terrible truth of Khorne's theology is that violence is a fundamental force. Khorne's existence in 40K suggests that in that universe, violence is not a mere product of mortal failings. It is a primal force that transcends morality, reason, purpose, and even the gods of chaos. It is a constant of both the material and immaterial realms. And the fact that Khorne might die at the end of all things means that he himself is subordinate to violence. Khorne's creation myth places the responsibility for his existence squarely on the shoulders of mortals. It is our unrestrained bloodlust that gives form to this manifestation of humanity's darkest instincts. The absence of meaning or justification in Khorne's domain underscores its nihilistic nature. Violence does not serve a higher purpose. It exists for its own sake. In this, Khorne's theology is both horrifying and profoundly honest. What sets Khorne apart from the other Chaos gods is this stark simplicity of his nature. He has no pretense, no subterfuge, no allure. He's not tempt followers. He offers nothing but violence, an unchanging constant. Violence is eternal, and its truth remains constant across time and space, reality and unreality. Khorne's mythology reveals a god whose essence is rooted in the most primal and unchanging aspect of existence, violence. From his birth in the bloodlust of mortals to his prophecy of an endless cycle of conflict, Khorne's domain reflects a dark and immutable truth. His theology is stark, nihilistic, and horrifyingly honest. Khorne is a mirror held up to the darkest instincts of humanity and the universe itself. Let's talk about Slaanesh. In certain canonical sources, it is noted that the other gods are quite concerned about Slaanesh. This canon story shows us why. Quote, "The other gods are attracted and repelled by Slaanesh in equal measure. Nowhere was this shown more clearly than when the Dark Prince presented each of his brothers with a chalice. Beguiled by Slaanesh's art, Nurgle and Tzeentch accepted the chalices of entropy and lies, glad, despite themselves, to be thought worthy of the Dark Prince's attention. Khorne, on the other hand, could not resolve his wrathful nature with the peculiar attraction that Slaanesh aroused. He smote the chalice of war a mighty blow, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Yet, even as the broken shards tumbled to the ground, Khorne felt compelled to gather the fragments together. For many days and nights, Khorne worked to repair the damage he had wrought, but when the labor was complete, the rage waxed strong within him, and he shattered the chalice once again. The blood god has since recreated and destroyed the chalice of war untold times, as unable to let the pieces lie, as to graciously accept the Dark Prince's gift. Though Khorne is the only god with open dislike of Slaanesh, both Nurgle and Tzeentch are uneasy in his presence. This is due in part to the fact that all the Chaos Gods embody Slaanesh's drive for excess. Khorne with his rage, Tzeentch with his schemes, and Nurgle with his love of pestilence. Lurking deep within the psyche of each of Slaanesh's brother gods is the suspicion that the influence of the Dark Prince is steadily gaining in strength, and that Slaanesh will perhaps one day eclipse them all. Let us discuss this story. Slaanesh gives gifts to the other gods which are concepts for them to include in their domains. Nurgle and Tzeentch accept, but they are troubled because they believe that in accepting they may be granting some advantage to Slaanesh which they do not understand. They suspect that there may be some string attached to the gift. Khorne takes the gift, the explicit effect and purpose of which is to bind the concept of war to him thematically. And he smashes it because he thinks that the organized nature of war is impure violence, and changes his nature in a way which is bad for him. He then spends forever in an endless cycle of carefully repairing the concept and claiming war as part of himself before smashing it again and reveling in the disorganization of pure violence. Khorne understands what Tzeentch and Nurgle do not. Even for gods, power has strings attached. Too many strings, and you become a marionette. This story is a brilliant piece of Warhammer 40,000's exploration of chaos and the complex interplay between the Chaos Gods. Each deity represents an abstract and infinite concept, but their interactions in the story highlight their limitations, fears, and vulnerabilities. Let us examine this story in detail and what it reveals about chaos as a whole. Slaanesh, the gift giver. The gifts are thematic concepts that expand or refine the domains of the other Chaos Gods. They may seem like acts of generosity or mutual enrichment, but they also represent Slaanesh's insidious ability to influence and bind others. By giving these gifts, Slaanesh is not just offering a token of goodwill, he is creating opportunities for manipulation. The gifts are carefully designed to insinuate Slaanesh's influence into the fabric of the other gods' domains, giving Slaanesh leverage over them. The story thus highlights why the other gods are particularly wary of Slaanesh. His unique threat, unlike Khorne, who dominates through brute force, or Nurgle, who overwhelms through inevitability. Slaanesh's ability to reframe and redefine the domains of the other gods presents a unique existential threat. Nurgle and Tzeentch are accepting, yet wary. Their acceptance of the gifts show their belief that they can absorb and integrate it into their existing domains without losing themselves. But their discomfort with Slaanesh's motives reflect an awareness that complacency could make them vulnerable to manipulation. Even Tzeentch, the master manipulator, is not immune to being manipulated. Indeed, perhaps he is more vulnerable, as compared with Khorne, who refuses to manipulate at all and thus recognizes the threat. By smashing the gift, Khorne asserts his independence and rejects the notion of being influenced or controlled, but his endless cycle of rebuilding it and smashing it again reveals his internal conflict. Khorne's destruction of the gift reflects his disdain for the organized nature of war, which he sees as an impure and thus antithetical to his essence of raw, chaotic violence. Yet by repeatedly rebuilding it, he acknowledges its utility, perhaps even its necessity, and its connection to his domain. Khorne understands the dangers of power. Accepting power comes with strings. His rejection of Slaanesh's gift is a rejection of influence and an assertion of his identity. But his cyclical actions show that he does still want that power. Even for gods, power comes with obligations, vulnerabilities, and dependencies. Khorne is both unwilling to reject the gift forever because it does strengthen his domain, and unwilling to accept power that would undermine his independence. The story thus underscores the irony that even the Chaos Gods, who are embodiments of infinite and abstract concepts, are bound by the forces they represent. Khorne understands that he may die at the end of all things. That is in keeping with his nature. But his rejection of Slaanesh's chalice of war is an acknowledgement of the paradox, showing that he seeks to avoid being ensnared by this nature. Chaos is thus a reflection of mortals. The Chaos Gods' reactions to Slaanesh's gifts mirror the struggles of mortals who seek power. Just as mortals are often ensnared by the gifts of chaos, the gods themselves are not immune to the dangers of influence and dependency. The story highlights why Slaanesh is particularly feared among the Chaos Gods. Slaanesh's ability to redefine and reshape their domains represents a threat to their autonomy and stability. I'll say that again. Slaanesh is uniquely dangerous to Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle because he represents excess, and their nature is necessarily excessive something. He has the potential to subsume them as greater daemons of Slaanesh. We can see this as perhaps the hints of a Slaaneshi eschatology. It seems possible that Khorne, reveling in an excess of violence or reveling in a great war or whatever, may empower Slaanesh as the god of excess. So it would not be too great a leap to imagine the other three gods becoming subservient to Slaanesh thematically. This is important. This will be on the test. By the nature of godhood, the thematic is the substantial. Thus, Slaanesh may eventually prove to be an existential threat, not necessarily to the other gods, but to their godhood. It is not bound to a single theme like war or decay or change. Instead, it embodies the very idea of taking things to their extreme. Excess is universal and can manifest in any domain, such as the domains of the other gods. By its nature, chaos is parasitic. By his nature, or by her nature, Slaanesh, she who thirsts, is the apex predator, thriving on pushing the other chaos gods towards ever greater extremes. Slaanesh grows stronger as the other three push their domains to excess, even when doing so seems to reinforce their own power. Khorne understands this. Khorne represents unrestrained bloodshed and the destruction of all opposition. But when taken to excess, this blind rage necessarily feeds Slaanesh. The revelry in violence, the indulgence in the sensation of battle, blurs the line between Khorne's purity of violence and Slaanesh's love of extreme sensation. Khorne's cyclical destruction of the concept of war from Slaanesh's gift illustrates his eternal conflict. He understands and rejects Slaaneshi influence, but his own nature drives him towards excess. He could unintentionally become a servant of Slaanesh's broader domain of indulgence. Nurgle, god of despair, thrives on entropy, the inevitability of decay, yet decay taken to an extreme leads to stagnation. This stasis can be indulgent, a wallowing in rot and futility, and in doing so, Grandfather Nurgle feeds Slaanesh's overarching theme of indulgence. As Nurgle's followers embrace their suffering, finding twisted joy in their decay, this joyful aspect of Nurgle ties directly into Slaanesh's domain, as the pleasure in rot and stagnation becomes indistinguishable from excess. Tzeentch represents the pursuit of knowledge, ambition, and transformation. But when taken to excess, this becomes mindless chaos, change for its own sake. The endless cycle of scheming and counter-scheming leads to an indulgence in cleverness cleverness, and manipulation that ultimately serves Slaanesh. Tzeentch's followers stereotypically become trapped in their own schemes, reveling in their brilliance and cleverness. And this indulgence in their intellect and ambition parallels Slaaneshi excess, making Tzeentch thus also an unwitting contributor to Slaaneshi power. Thus threatens thematic subservience. If Slaanesh were to achieve thematic dominance over the other gods, their domains would become subsets of excess. Khorne's violence, Nurgle's despair and rot, and Tzeentch's change could all be reframed as expressions of indulgence, stripping the other gods of their autonomy, and no longer feeding them with power from mortals directly, but instead that power going to Slaanesh, to then give out portions of power according to the whims of she who thirsts. For chaos gods, thematic is the substantial. The concept of godhood in the warp is intrinsically tied to themes and ideas. If Slaanesh dominates thematically, it does so existentially, potentially erasing or subsuming the other gods. If the other gods' domains are too specific and taken to excess, Slaanesh's domain is universal, encompassing and amplifying all the others. Slaanesh's parasitic, predatory nature ensures that it grows stronger the more its rivals indulge their extremes. This creates an ironic feedback loop where the other gods' attempts to assert their power inadvertently empower Slaanesh, potentially leading to their own subservience or annihilation. The implications for the warp, then, are that if Slaanesh were to achieve dominance over the other three great gods, all concepts and ideas would be twisted into indulgence in their most extreme forms. And thus, the concept of chaos undivided would take on a new meaning under Slaaneshi dominance. Instead of representing the plurality of chaos, it would represent the subsumption of the other gods into Slaanesh's domain, creating a singular, overwhelming force of excess. Let us examine Nurgle. As the god of decay and entropy and despair, he only builds as a means to an end. The end goal he has in mind is simply the end of all things, everywhere, forever. It is the nature of chaos for things to fall apart. In that, the very natures of his fellow gods, the very nature of chaos undivided, those are all aligned uncomfortably closely to Nurgle's own nature. Further, entropy is the natural state of the real universe as well. Thus, Nurgle is the chaos god most intimately linked and most closely aligned with the material world and the warp, arguably with chaos itself. Thus, Nurgle's position within the pantheon of chaos is both profound and paradoxical. His dominion over decay and entropy positions him as the god whose domain most directly reflects the fundamental nature of both the real world and the warp. Nurgle is, interestingly, the only one of the chaos gods to be linked to a non-living process, entropy, the inexorable process by which all things decay, degrade, and eventually collapse into ruin. The other three are all about what sapient beings do. Nurgle's influence can be seen in every aspect of the material world. Biological decay, from the rot of organic matter to the degradation of human flesh. Every disease, infection, and parasitic infestation serves as a testament to his power. Structural entropy causes even the grandest of edifices, either physical or ideological, to succumb to time. Civilizations crumble, monuments erode, and ideals decay under the weight of corruption and apathy. Stars burn out, planets die, and the fabric of reality itself trends towards the cosmic inevitability of heat death. Thus, Nurgle's power aligns with the non-living material reality. And ironically, despite his alignment with decay, Nurgle is often depicted as the most human of the Chaos Gods, Grandfather Nurgle. His gifts are often framed as a twisted form of love. He offers his followers freedom from fear, pain, and uncertainty, replacing them with an embrace of the inevitable, rather than openly succumbing to despair, which is really what they're doing. His cultists revel in their own decay, seeing it as a blessing rather than a curse. Khorne demands violence, Slaanesh demands indulgence, and Tzeentch demands change, but Nurgle demands only resignation. His appeal lies in the seductive comfort of giving up, of ceasing to struggle. It's a kind of negative nirvana. The familial imagery of Grandfather Nurgle reinforces the idea of acceptance and comfort, as it masks the horror of his true nature to his followers, his children. To his brothers, Nurgle's dominion over decay aligns uncomfortably well with the inherent instability of chaos. Yes, Khorne's violence leads to death, but death feeds decay. Every battlefield is a feast for Nurgle. As Khorne revels in the act of killing, Nurgle claims the act of dying. Slaanesh's excess and indulgence inevitably lead to ruin. The pursuit of perfection becomes obsession, obsession becomes corruption, and corruption leads to decay. Nurgle lurks at the end of Slaanesh's path. Tzeentch's change is inherently unstable, and instability leads to collapse. Tzeentch creates endlessly, but every scheme, every plan, and every grand design eventually falls apart. Nurgle patiently waits for creation to wither and die. All the Chaos Gods have aligned interests only in the breakdown of order and stability. In this, Nurgle's domain is the bedrock upon which their power is built. This positions him as both a beneficiary and a threat to the unity of chaos. No alliance between the Chaos Gods can endure indefinitely, because even the great game itself is subject to Nurgle's influence. As schemes unravel, alliances crumble, and rivalries reignite. Nurgle's eschatology is that if chaos were ever to achieve complete victory, Nurgle's dominion would consume the others. Decay would triumph, leaving nothing but stagnation and ruin. He's the god of the end, the final arbiter of all things, the hideous deity of time. And yet there's the paradox. Nurgle's nature positions him as both the end of all things, the god of death, and also a source of life within chaos. Nurgle's plagues are often depicted as gifts to his followers, and their followers see their own infection, their own infestations, as a kind of rebirth. This mirrors the natural cycle of life and death, where decay fertilizes new growth, but in a hideous stagnated form, where nothing is ever allowed to fully die, instead being kept around to only decay forever. Nurgle promises acceptance and freedom from fear, but his followers are ultimately enslaved by their own corruption. Rather than ever finding the peace of a positive nirvana, they find the perpetual stagnation of a negative nirvana, a living death in which they seek a final end, but death flees from them. Nurgle's unique alignment with both the warp and the material world thus positions him as the most intimately connected god to both the warp and the material universe. That sentence got away from me a little. His power is inexorable and universal, so he claims, feeding on the inevitable decline of all things, thus making him a constant and pervasive threat to the Imperium and to his fellow Chaos Gods. Nurgle's domain ensures that even chaos itself cannot escape the inexorable pull of decay. These examinations should not be surprising. Chaos springs from the worst impulses of humanity. So the Neverborn suffer every flaw of humanity, untempered by the nobler sides of mortals, unable to ever contemplate what we understand as compassion, understanding, cooperation, empathy, or loyalty. The powers of chaos only know those things as words they can hide darker concepts behind. such as Khorne enslaving Angron while calling it loyalty or fealty. The Emperor of Mankind knew all of this better than any mortal, and he knew that the idea space thus had a massive unclaimed area that the Chaos Gods could not touch. He gestures towards the Imperium's higher ideals, occupying this idea space of humanity's nobler instincts. But he never actually put any work into putting these concepts into practice, either in the Imperium broadly for its hundreds of billions of citizens, or in his relationships with his sons. Had the Primarchs treated each other or been treated by the Emperor as if these noble concepts were real and important and achievable, then the Chaos Gods would have no appeal to them. They needed compassion, understanding, cooperation, empathy, and loyalty, and they could have given it. They could have received it, and many of them did not, because of poor decisions made by individuals. Those decisions were choices, not inevitabilities. None of this was destined. Any of them could have chosen differently at any number of critical junctures, important moments, or everyday conversation. You, watching this at home, can choose to treat people around you well.